What I think helped us get grounded was to use our mathematical modeling to figure out, if we're really talking about long-term vision and we want stabilization of the CO2 in the atmosphere, then what does that look like in 2050 and 2030 and then back up to what we need to do. And we had a pretty extensive computer modeling effort with BP. They knowing the fuel side of the business, we know the vehicle side of the business, and can we put our knowledge together and come up with a model that would help us not only tell us what trajectory we need to be on, but when certain things have to happen, because you reach a point where you can't do any more with what you have, so you have to jump to the next technology. But if you haven't planned for it, it'll take a while to get there, and if the infrastructure is not there, it takes a while too. So we used the model to kind of guide us and ground it in science, saying, okay, what does it really take? What does it mean to our product plan? What does it mean to our customers? Because it's all about affordability as well. We could say, okay, here's the $1 million vehicle that's going to solve all the problems in the world, but no one can buy it. It doesn't change anything. So we have to figure out, how do you make it affordable for mass production? How do you make it for the everyday person? And then at what point have you gotten all that you can possibly have from that technology that you have to move on to another? And then even then you can't just ramp up, to high volume. You have to start low. So when do you start? Where's the supply base? Where's the infrastructure? But then you start to realize it really is a system that you have to look at. And you were talking about personal mobility. Do we need it? And, is it important? And I think that's the defining part of society when people truly prosper, is when they can have personal mobility, that they can get from place to place. And you think about people not being able to get to a job, and you had a good point to say, do you need to go to a job, or can you just do whatever you can? And the internet has changed a lot of that. But people moving about, goods and services moving about, transportation has really been the key to every society, moving up from, kind of third world to a developed nation. Just think about what you can do today, and from wherever you are in the world. Think about people starting up small businesses, and they're in India or China or whatever, and in a little village they can communicate, sell what they need to do. I mean, it has really changed things, but you still, I think that this idea of personal transportation, even if it was automated, where people aren't driving, they still want to be in their own little cocoon or whatever. Well, I do think, though, we are so far behind, and we are so spread out, where we don't have the density of the cities like you do in other parts of the world. But at some point, we need to be having developed a high-speed train linking a lot of our major cities. It doesn't make any sense to be flying between Washington and Boston or New York. You could do that on a high-speed train much more efficiently. And I think you'll start to see some of that when people are thinking about what's our overall policy. And we've been so locked into the interstate highways and stuff, but as the populations grow, you can't just keep building more roadways. You got to figure out, how do you manage the traffic, and how do you manage the people part of it. And so we have looked a lot at that, and I do believe that there is an emotional attachment to cars. It's not just about getting from place to place. If that was the case, we'd all be driving, boxes, and it wouldn't really matter, right?
Yeah, little
and so,
pods,
so people, it is part of your personality. It's part of your statement.
I'm very interested now whether we're seeing a change where there's, even like Facebook and Twitter and all of that, whether there are new ways that young people can express, particularly young people can express their identity without the need for a car.
And whether that's almost replacing the car, because we're seeing in places like Japan, young people under 25, I think the car sales them has kind of dropped off over years, hasn't it? And there's an argument that some people are making that young people are no longer interested in cars, especially in certain sort of pockets of the world.
Well, I think they may not be interested in owning a car. but I think they're still interested in driving a car and connecting that with their identity. It's just that they don't need to own it. And I think that's going to be a symptom of the credit crunch and a number of other things that people want the experience, but they want a different experience, different days. So they're going out somewhere. They might want a truck or, moving furniture, or, matcha, type rugged, go off-road or something like that. But then other times you're going out, in the evening and you want something more elegant, or you're going to want sporty or whatever. So I do think you're going to start to see, like the zip cars and other things where people are just borrowing a car for a while, but they still want to have the identity. So it's not like just a junker. They still want to have a nice vehicle. So you think you'll see some of that.
And is that something that Ford is kind of interested in? Because I guess people would say you're just in the business of really selling people cars at the moment.
Well, we've looked at a lot of different things. In fact, we in our sustainability report, in the last couple of years, we've talked about some projects that we've had trying to understand megacities and what that means when you get these huge cities and how do you move people around. And we thought there may be a role for us in that in terms of trying to help people know what transportation is available and kind of be the IT supplier of moving people. But that's not really our core business. But then if part of that is to sell the vehicles that are being used in these car shares, then that's still a business opportunity for us. So we've got to have our eyes on the horizon on everything, different business models and different ways of doing business, because things could change. And the idea is that you want to still have that interaction with your customer, and you got to figure out what does that customer really want.
Well, it's funny because we were talking the other day about the fact that both Joe and I, who live in cities, but then 50% of the world's population has just gone, went over last year.
Yes, for the first time in the history of the world, more people are in cities than in
outside,
rural areas. Yeah.
And while it's often, often people say, oh, well, that's not really relevant to the car industry. Or people that will just dismiss it. There's still 50% to sell to. I mean, I think 50% of the world's population now lives in cities.
Right. And
if the auto industry can't draw revenues, can't sell them products or services, that's a real shame. And
I think it's just a different. Yeah, it is a different model, because when you think about the idea of the congestion, how much time you're spending in the vehicle. And if there was a way to manage that better and get people from point to point with the public transportation, you still have that interface. You still have your own personal, but how do you interface more seamlessly, and how do you make it a better experience?
A great somebody that's really influenced our thinking on this is a guy called Dan Sturges, who runs a company called Intrigo in Boulder, Colorado. It's just one of the most amazing minds I've ever met on this.
Yeah.
And Dan describes it as, we call it Project Tarzan. It's literally how do you swing from vine to vine
to get to And we looked at that too as far as a hub concept. And so if you had a number of hubs, different places, and then at that hub you could figure out, do I walk, do I take a bike, do I take a train, a bus, whatever, or a car share and all that. And it's just a matter of how would you lay out a city then that's kind of organized in a hub concept so that all that is available. And in fact, what we're seeing even in the U.S. is that real estate that's near railroads before were just to move goods and not people, but now parts of the urban areas are being renovated and they're near these train lines, and they're saying, well, this could be mass transit. Now they're becoming more valuable. So I think there's going to be a mixture of all this. I mean, in the U.S., we are so spread out. I think you're still going to always find that need that you want to be able to go further. But then with policies like you have in London and in Paris and some of the other cities where they're not going to even let cars in, and Cape Town and others, that you've then got to figure out, well, then how are people going to get around, and how are you going to make all that work?